I think as Edtech providers, you need to really sit down with those leaders when you're building a product versus build a product and then try to shoehorn it into a school system. And the Edtech providers that are able to do that are successful. Edtech providers that co-build with school districts and with leaders are successful.
Welcome to Education Matters. Today's episode marks the beginning of a new sub-series on education technology, where I'll be stepping slightly outside the usual format to provide EdTech leaders, startups, and founders with insight from some of the most experienced folks in the industry, as well as focus interviews with school district administrators on the needs, challenges, and opportunities of effectively integrating tech into the classroom. Over the years, I've met dozens of passionate founders, investors, and operators building really interesting and unique tools for learning. Many of whom care deeply about education, but don't always understand how the system works from the inside. So this series is designed to bridge that gap, to give EdTech leaders a real, unvarnished look into what school districts actually need, how procurement really happens, and what it takes to build partnerships that support not only teachers and students, but the entire school district. To kick things off, I'm joined by my longtime friend and colleague, Matt Monjan, who is a seasoned EdTech leader and has spent decades on the front lines of educational sales and partnerships. Matt has led high-performing teams, navigated the messy realities of procurement and politics, and now runs his own company, Infuse Ed, to help startups break into the education markets with clarity, ethics, and strategy. In this episode, we get into why most founders misunderstand how school districts actually buy, the difference between marketing to teachers versus solving problems for school districts on the whole, what to know about budget cycles, pilots, and decision-making timelines, why building relationships, not just features, still really matter, and what Matt looks for when helping founders find product market fit in K-12. Whether you're new to EdTech or a veteran trying to scale with more precision, this episode is full of practical advice. So without further ado, here's the first episode of our new EdTech series with Matt Monjan. Matt Monjan, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where do we find you today?
Thank you, Jason. I am in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C., about 14 miles as the crows fly, and you might hear some in the background. In a really clear day, you can get on top of one of our hills and see the monument. So that's where I am right now.
That's awesome. And Matt, you have the distinguished honor of being the first guest on the podcast that's recording outside, and I love it. It looks great.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Because I'm in this location, we're in a temperate zone, right? But which means that right now with climate warming, which is real, we have about more summer than we do spring and fall and a lot of winter. So you take advantage of when you can be outside.
Well, I'm sure many of my Canadian colleagues that are listening to this understand exactly what you're talking about. With perhaps even a few degrees colder up here. So Matt, with that, I've known you and worked with you for the better part of a decade, but can you give the audience a brief overview about you and your work?
Yeah, sure. And it's been awesome getting to know and experience this journey with you, Jason. So before we met, I was still at Discovery Education. I was there for 14 years and led some partnerships teams there as well as a community team, and started my EdTech journey really at Discovery Education. Before that, I was working for a number of associations in Washington, D.C., running their professional learning operations, but made that transition to Discovery. Being a lifelong Marylander, born and raised, you either wanted to work at the Discovery Channel, which was headquartered in Maryland, started out of University of Maryland, or you wanted to work at Marriott right? Those are the big premier companies. I didn't really like going to hospitality, although you and I have certainly spent a fair amount of time in a Marriott. But definitely wanted to go to Discovery. And one day it happened to be that they had posted a job to help teachers understand how to use this new thing called streaming media in their classroom. And it was on T1 fractured lines, right? So really slow speeds, but how do you get a teacher to use a resource? And even back then it was under the banner of equity, so that no one, if, back in the day, if one teacher had the video cassette of Dr. Martin Luther King, then their class could watch it, but not everybody else could. So this really democratized that access where everybody could access. Maybe not at the same time still with bandwidth speeds, but that's where we came in and started to help teachers understand how to use them in the classroom. And from there, that's how my career went to a calling of helping educators, differentiate and use media in the classroom to reach all kids.
Well, that's awesome, Matt. And I'm really excited to have you really as the first guest in what I'm calling a sub-series on Edtech, because you've really been there for, I want to say such a long time, but really a transitional and fundamental time in where tech really started exploding into the classrooms. And there's still, I think, a lot of confusion or, maybe it's blind spots as to what the realities look like on the ground for an ed tech company implementing in school districts, and really what it's like to even develop resources as an ed tech company to go into the public education space and support teachers and educators. So thank you for being the first one in this mini series. Right. As always, I want to just start giving a brief background of my guest. So can you give the audience a sense of like where and when did you grow up and what was your educational journey like?
Yeah, so my educational journey is still going. And I started, so I'm 53 years old. I grew up in Maryland and live in Maryland still. And my K-8 life, kindergarten through 8th grade life, was in Baltimore County. I went to an urban elementary school, which has been renamed an academy, but still there. And then I went to a middle school, again, not too far away from that elementary school, which is still there. Now a STEM magnet school, which is great, in Baltimore County. And now from there, my dad moved us closer to Washington, D.C., and I went to high school in Howard County. And I was not a great student, had some trouble concentrating at some point along the way, and work through some coping strategies on how to help with that learning. And I found that the educators that really impacted me on my learning journey were the ones that stopped and wanted to get to know me. And although differentiation wasn't really a thing that I experienced a lot in my career learning journey in school, those that really did try to tailor projects to that interested me, I really thrived. And those that did things that were rote, I really didn't thrive. And so I think for me, that was a big awakening or understanding for me as I went forward into EdTech on how I like to learn. And now with a son and a daughter who've grown up in this digital age, it's been interesting for me to watch the shifts from EdTech and being on devices to, well, wait a minute, maybe we don't need to be on devices all the time, right? And understanding that and tackling that as a parent. And that's still been part of my learning journey today. Yeah.
So Matt, anywhere along this learning journey, whether it was, high school, university or otherwise, what did you study that kind of most impacted how you work and think today?
So it's interesting, Jason. So my mom, she's kind of a religious person, told me, she's like, I prayed and I think that like your pathway is you're going to be an educator someday. And I was like, no way, I'm not going to be an educator. And there's no way. Didn't, in high school, I was like, nah, I want to be, something else. They don't make money. I don't see I don't see it for me, mom. And I'm going to resist. And then after I graduated college, I went out to Arizona and worked for AmeriCorps doing teaching migrant workers how to learn English and be assimilated into the country. And so my mom was like, see, I told you. And it wasn't until I went to university that I started taking some classes. I thought, well, maybe I will be an educator. And I took some classes, and there was an amazing set of courses I took around differentiation and strategies around that. In high school, I was really good at Spanish and learning languages. So I was like, oh, I'll just be a Spanish major. And so then, and with a French minor is what I ended up doing. And then you couldn't graduate without having something else underneath that. So education was that underneath that for me. So my mom's like, see, I told you. And I was like, even then I resisted. I was like, oh, I'll do something else. But full circle came back to Discovery Education and found that I really enjoy working with educators and working with administrators and working with leaders to help kids, which is where I think my passion lies and where I took so long to realize where I needed to be.
Mm. In that journey, I know you've been all over the United States in districts and classrooms. Can you kind of describe some of the most inspiring things that you've seen along that way?
Yeah, actually, I've been in Canada as well. So all the way from across the United States, but then in Halifax and to Moncton, which was one of my inspiring experiences. But for me, it comes down to a story that in Miami-Dade where I was still wrestling with, do I want to do more in education than what I'm doing right now? And we both had an amazing leader in Scott Kinney. And Scott's like, oh, you want to get more of a flavor? Okay. I'm going to send you to Miami-Dade and I'm going to send you to some turnaround schools. And I want you to go in and prepare some lessons with the educators and deliver them in elementary, middle, and high school. And this was part of a project with the turnaround team in Miami-Dade. So I'm like, yes, awesome. So I went there and I taught a lesson on the difference between heat and temperature, and using Discovery Education and some digital resources. And I had just this awesome experience where this elementary student, afterwards, it was between me, I was the last class before lunch. And this was a Title I school, and this is one of the meals that they were definitely going to get. And so they were standing around waiting for autographs afterwards because they thought I was part of the Discovery Channel. And I was like, look, I'll sign everything that you put in front of me, but you go to lunch, and when you come back, you'll have all this stuff. But this one little girl said, no, I want to wait. And she let everybody in front of her, everybody kept jumping in front of her, and I kept trying to get to her. And I ran out of, I put all these euphemisms like, you're awesome, you're great. And I ran out of things to say and I wanted to do something really special for her. And I was like, what can I say for you that will make you feel special and know that how much I appreciate you? And she's like, oh, Mr. Matt, you can just say I'm cooler than heat. So I just thought that was that moment where like I had this connection with a kid, and she was learning and she was excited, and she had made this connection, this light bulb go off, and brought it back to what we were talking about. I was like, what, this is what it's all about. And I got to experience that for a day. I'd like to experience it more, but yeah, that was awesome.
Fantastic. You've also worked with a ton of superintendents and education leaders across North America. Can you kind of describe for the folks for this series, which will be mainly startup edtech entrepreneurs, can you describe for them what really great leaders are like and why it's so important to engage with them along the process as they're developing resources and thinking about supporting public education?
Yeah. So I've been doing this for close to 30 years now in this education space. And the one constant with leaders is that things are going to change. Politics will ebb and flow the way that education policy is delivered or is implemented. But the one constant is doing what's right for the kids and what's right for a community. And then empowering your educators and your leaders in your schools and your districts to do what's right versus doing like the fist approach and you're going to do this and we're going to take this initiative and that's it, right? No buy-in. So the leaders that I've seen be tremendously successful, like Dr. Aaron Spence or like Dr. Eli Bracey, or those two are from Virginia. What they've done, just top of mind, is they've done that approach of really like sitting down, being with kids, learning from them, coming from this culture of love. Dr. Lubell Brown does this too, and then looking at all the stuff that's trying to get in the way and clearing those hurdles and standing up to some of those hurdles, saying, no, we're going to do this because this is what's good for kids. I think that's the one constant that good leaders do. I think as ed tech providers, you need to really sit down with those leaders when you're building a product versus build a product and then try to shoehorn it into a school system. And the ed tech providers that are able to do that are successful. Ed tech providers that co-build with school districts and with leaders are successful.
So, Matt, I would have done an introduction here where I gave folks a sense of your background, but I think here's a good opportunity to kind of describe what you're doing now for folks so they understand kind of the purview you have and the work that you're intimately involved with right now.
Sure. So right now I have my own agency, an edtech consultancy called Infuse Edu. And really we work with edtech providers, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, to help them scale their outreach, their partnerships. And we do that through advisory. We do that through connections with other superintendents. Or it could be also some type of work where we do help with building out and rolling out a product and helping look at what that go-to-market plan is and then executing it. That really came about 3 years ago. The idea started, I was working for a nonprofit, a large education nonprofit called ASCD, which is now ASCD ISTE, and decided, rather than represent one product or one company or one organization that might be doing great stuff, what if I could find the very best resources around the country or internationally and bring them to kids, especially in communities of need, especially in, historically disadvantaged communities. So that's the impetus for the work that I do. And that's where I vet who I want to work with.
Matt, you've worked with some really large organizations that you mentioned, but at this stage you would have worked with, or you have worked with and are working with a ton of different ed tech companies, from startups to mid-size. Can you describe for folks what the best ed tech companies that you've come across have in common?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The best ed tech companies are the ones that are, they may have already had a product in production that they built because they were like, this is a great idea. But when they go to school systems, realize that it doesn't have as much of a take, right? And the best ones have said, okay, let me rethink how my product is serving the communities that I'm selling into and work alongside the educators and leaders to either tweak or rebuild the product to meet those needs. The best ed tech companies that I work with also don't come from the lens of trying to grab all the resources and take and consume, but rather they make revenue and also give back to those communities. And they can give back not through giving back in the form of money, but they can give back in time, give back in supporting what the districts are doing with their communities, whether it be like a parent night or things like that, but being part of the fabric of the community versus trying to consume and be direct to a community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Maybe I can have you put a finer point on the latter there. What are some of the common mistakes that you see edtech leaders or edtech companies make over and over again?
I think it's really prevalent now, Jason. The mistake is with AI, you can build and rapidly build a prototype or build a product, which is great. That's a great thing to be able to do with AI. But if you're not building because you're going to have impact with a school system that you're trying to sell into, i.e., helping students read better by third grade or and whatever the initiative is from the district, and you're just building to sell, that's a mistake, right? That building just to cash out is the mistake, and that's the finer point I'm trying to make. If you're building with intention, with the idea that I'm building this in collaboration with school systems that I'm working with, and there are thousands of school systems in the United States, but there are central themes that all systems tackle with. So really being intentional and sitting with leaders as you build or refine, I think that is the way to be successful. And if you don't do it, you'll be unsuccessful or just another piece of noise amongst the thousands of other ed tech and now AI pieces that are out there.
Yeah, no doubt there's going to be a proliferation of all kinds of tools and solutions. Like that's always something that I worry when I see. It's like we got a solution, right. And oftentimes they haven't, to your point, understood the problem. Do you have any examples or recommendations for how a small ed tech company that's really just bootstrapping their operation should go about this? Because it can be daunting, could be intimidating for people that are unlike us that know how to navigate the system. What recommendations would you give to them on how to go about it the right way from the onset?
Yeah, so I think it doesn't matter if you're in the US or Canada or London or Asia. I think that if you're starting out and you're bootstrapped or you have a beta or even an alpha, one of the best things to realize in the education space is that it's relationship driven, right? Everything, partnerships, especially in the United States, is about trusting who you're working with, right? From an ed tech provider, you have to understand that in the United States, as in Canada, as in other places, the dollars that are being spent are not necessarily owned. They're not dollars from the school system, right? They're taxpayer dollars from the people that live in those communities and are vetted and are scrutinized and are fought over. So when a district says, I'm going to spend with you, they have to understand that you're going to be there in the long term, right? They're not going to get burned. or you're going to be doing something because they can say, we did this, we spent our limited amount of money on you, and we saw these impact, right? So the one way to help as a bootstrap company is do something we call Lighthouse, and we have a protocol for it where you start in one location. You don't say, I'm going to tackle the U.S. market. You might say, I need to tackle, this corner of New York or this part of Nevada or whatever. And you do your proof case, right? You say, okay, I'm sitting down with the leaders, I'm sitting down with the schools, I'm building this product. We now have implementation in this area, this geographic area. And you literally can draw a circle around that geographic area and say, okay, because this school looks like this school and this principal talks to that principal, or this leader talks to that leader, now let's go talk to that other leader, right? And you start to grow. And what I've noticed along my years here is that district leaders, superintendents, really good superintendents make other superintendents. So I'll go back to Dr. Aaron Spence, and he's now in Loudoun County. Before he was in Loudoun County, he was in Houston way back when he was becoming a superintendent, right? And he had an amazing superintendent leader, Dr. Terry Greer. And in Dr. Greer's staff, he also had Dr. Mark Bedell and others, Dr. Dance, and they all kind of worked together. Well, what Aaron learned, Dr. Spence learned, was that if he could create amazing leaders amongst him, then they would go out and become superintendents and be really great leaders in that vein. So he created, or he helped bring out Dr. Amy Cash, who's now in Henrico, or Dr. Dance brought Verletta and Mark Bedell. And they became all superintendents in other areas. And so then they're growing other people underneath them, and they're going out and being leaders around the country. So I share that really long story is because those great leaders have family trees. And when you're doing your Lighthouse approach, one approach is geography, but another approach is who's on that branch of that superintendent tree that I can work with and build out. And so you don't have to be nationwide, you can be tree wide and work amongst that tree, because again, once you have that relationship and you have that foundation, that big trunk, you can grow lots of branches with your organization.
Yeah, I love that, Matt, because a lot of folks starting out, and even when they're a medium-sized company, they look at the Toronto District School Boards of the world, the Chicago Public School Boards, Miami, LA, and they say, well, that's where we want to go because they're the biggest. And I've interviewed like Peter Singh on this podcast, who's the CTO of Toronto, and he's like, we're just so huge. Our scale is so difficult. We have everybody reaching out to us. And I think that's really great advice, that you can start with smaller districts that have more bandwidth, and even more to the point, are very influential in education in a specific area. So there's a lot of opportunity for folks to learn from those examples.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So if we look on the district side now, Matt, I think it'd be useful for these folks to understand too, that sometimes when they purchase your product, it's just the start really of the relationship. It feels like the end because you've gone through this entire process of pilots and trials and relationship building. But can you give folks a sense of what districts struggle with when it comes to tech adoption, so they have a bit of an understanding of this is just really maybe not even the midway point?
Yeah. Well, especially when you get into the larger systems that you mentioned, sometimes a procurement team might have an RFP out there and you're a slice of that RFP and you win and you get paid by that system. But the principals don't know that they have this product now in the school system. Maybe not even part of other parts of the district staff. The content teams might be like, I didn't know we had this tool. And so now you have the battle of implementation and awareness. And so that's really where it comes back to those relationships. It's great that if you have a relationship with a superintendent, that's awesome. And you should, right? They are the leaders. They're often not the decision makers. They're the influencers. They're the pushers, right? So that once they get in, and a good superintendent will say, I want you to talk to my team. And if my team asks back for this resource, I'll bless it, right? Because I know, but I want them to have that buy-in. So if you don't have that relationship now with the people that have to do the work to drive that awareness, that's another whole thing that you got to build in to your product. And also, how are you making sure that amongst the other things that have been purchased by the district, your product can be used? And one tip around that might be that look at it from how does it complement versus and how can it augment or complement versus replace, right? Because you might have veteran teachers who have always used this one book, this one resource, this one thing, and be like, I'm not using that, right? However, if you can sit down with the content teams, the district teams, the principals, the coordinators, and say, like, okay, let's look at what you have as a partner, and not think that my product has to be the replacement of the other product, but over time, how can my product be used across multiple content areas or multiple resources? That's going to give you that staying power.
Yeah,
so
awesome.
It's really understanding that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think enough founders understand that process, which almost becomes like a communications process. It has nothing to do with your product, but you really have to help a district communicate to its own constituents that, this is a product that's been purchased, that's been licensed, that it can be used in A, B, C, D settings. And there's a lot of post-sale work that is necessary. So thanks for that.
There's more post-sale than there is than there is sale. That's the hard part. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about effective use, right? We want to support people in really helping districts, achieve their goals, not per se a bottom line with an ed tech company that we know is the reality, but this is how real robust partnerships are made.
Yeah.
So Matt, if I can ask you to look forward into, I know this is a tough one, even just the next 5 years of development in ed tech, what do you think are the areas that are really rich for development and really can make an impact in public education?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question earlier when you posed it to me. It's really hard to tell at how I feel. We're in this next wave of innovation with this AI, right? And we are constantly in these waves in education. Before that, it was around Web 2.0, and before that, it was just using digital resources. So there's also this conflict with security and the information that's getting put back out to kids. So I think that EdTech, to be successful in the next 5 years, still goes down the idea of content creation, right? Students are able to make those connections through project-based learning, creating something to demonstrate their understanding and their competency. But there needs to be a connection to like the why, right? I may want to be a doctor someday and I know that path, but not all kids know that, right? So how can I, as a student, apply my learning tomorrow to start my own entrepreneurial business, right? We see that on TikTok, and who knows what the flavor will be 5 years from now, but at the end of the day, kids are generating content to get likes, to get noticed, and sometimes to make money. So how do we help those kids and solve for that, where they can see that application right away? And that's whatever that EdTech company can do that meets that learning and helps those students make those connections quickly to careers or entrepreneurial businesses, I think that's the ticket. I am curious, what as this AI continually grows exponentially and gets faster and faster, what are the skill sets that students need to know? And I think still that critical thinking is a key to understanding like how do I put something together? And I think the next wave after those 5 years, or maybe somewhere in the middle, is how do we know AI can generate stuff and through generative prompts, but who's training the bots to talk to one another to go out and have like a bunch of bots doing the work for me to and synthesize that data back to something? So how do I help my kids think about creating these generative agents, these multiple AI tools and aggregators and generators to create something connected, if that makes any sense. So, for example, like we know that we can have somebody go out and find plane fares, and we know that somebody can go out, or a bot can do that, and we know a bot can go out and find hotel fares. But if I was to do that from a learning perspective, like what if I was to map a journey from a modern day journey for Columbus, right? How would he get to all the way to where he needs to go in the East Indies and then beyond? Or would he make the mistake of trying to find that passage if he had these bots? And what would those bots do to create that pathway? And I'm working on a product right now sort of with that idea in mind, where students can solve for a problem in their local community. So in Maryland, where I live, we live near the Chesapeake Bay. We have farms on the Eastern Shore that feed the country. A lot of their residual waste or things get fed back into the bay and pollute the bay. Well, what if students could figure out, okay, using Google Maps and other overlays, could I see where that sediment is running off and maybe create like an offset program like we do with carbon, or do a program where I help farmers in these areas that are polluting to do less pollution, right? And using AI and other tools like that to create a tool that I can create my own little entrepreneurial business, and impacts and do good impact. So that project-based learning, I think.
Yeah, project-based learning, but then it's acting in the world for a lot of ethical reasons. I think, like, to me, I agree with you. That's the ticket, right? To have a more refined, airline search thing. Yeah, I'm sure someone will do it, and like it might be profitable, but does that help us really move the needle forward in all the areas? So if I could put an exclamation point on that, it's like, yeah, if we can use tech to aggregate effort and organize community around all these ethical things that we know we need to do, I think that's the real ticket, because kids can learn, kids can refine their sense of acting in the world and their ethical competence, and then actually go out and do it would be a revelation.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be just be like high school, right? It would be all the way down to elementary school. How do I do that?
Exactly. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. So I think that's the next wave.
So maybe I preempted this next question, but one of my favorite questions is always, because it forces folks to use their imagination and strip down all the perceived barriers that we have about changing the system, is if I gave you a magic wand and you could do anything to the education system, but I'm going to ask you to have a particular view to Edtech in this answer. And if you could do anything to change the system, what would you do?
If I could change anything specific to Edtech, I think I think it's just, again, leading with that social impact lens, the what's good for kids versus what's good for my investor or my revenue, and building accordingly. I think that's the magic wand. If I could, Jason, when we were at Discover Education, we had great leaders. And one of the mantras that we lived by was do well by the school first, do well by the community first. And in turn, by doing that, you will do well. If we could have EdTech work in that premise and build in that premise, I think that would be the magic wand that I would do. There is no one silver bullet. There's no one perfect resource out there. There are a bunch of amazing resources out there, and we've worked with them and continue to do so. But there's no one thing. So if I was to build with that idea in mind first and collaborate with those partners, those education partners, that would be the one that I want to do.
Awesome. And with that, Matt, last question always is, what book, podcast, video, music album would you recommend to the audience? You can just pick one. You don't have to do one of all of them, but just give us a sense of some good stuff to consume.
I don't do a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of junky stuff too, but bubblegum stuff, right? But I like Dr. Cedar Narcisse's podcast. He's unpacking like education. I think that's a really good one. I'm excited to see more of your podcast, Jason. But I don't have a singular recommendation. I will tell you that I've been so heads down on doing this type of work that when we come up for air, I just watched like a lot of British police procedurals, and kind of just be like, that's what we're watching now in our home. It's the BBC, and it's BritBox is a lot of what's happening right now, which has totally nothing to do with what we're talking about. But we get lost in these worlds and can detach for a little bit, just not think about those things, those heavy things.
Well, that's awesome. I think everyone needs some plug-in, and a plug for the BBC is awesome at any time. With that, Matt Monjan, thanks so much for your time, brother.
Yeah, you bet, Jason.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.